Hello. In this video, I'm going to be looking at the M-IV-Yoh. Just before the video, I must say Wargaming has just announced the Schwarzpanzer 58, which is basically uh, a worse Panzer 58 WoT, which is this tank. Um, they didn't give us the tanks early, so the content on that is not prepared yet. But I will be doing a review as usual on my website and a video as well. Uh, because I won't have the content on that and it will be coming out shortly, I will say the Schwarzpanzer 58 is not a good tank at all. It's basically a Panzer 58 Mutz, but without the good accuracy, without the good penetration, without the good DPM, without the nice 240 alpha damage, without the decent mobility. By the way, this tank's mobility isn't all that good, it's decent. Imagine basically this, but even slower. On top of that, it's got um, lower top speed. It's got worse hit points by a massive amount. It forces you to use sandbag armor, while this one just has improved assembly um, as base. But basically, not a good tank. I won't be talking about the Schwarzpanzer in this video. Too long on that now. Back to the M-IV-Yoh. So the M-IV-Yoh. Basically, it's a T-54E2 with a few different stats and a different type of gun. I do say in the title, this tank is OP. That's not clickbait. I believe this tank is OP. You have to know how to use it right, though. You have to know the situations where you reload the gun and where you take advantage of your adrenaline DPM, which is what this tank has. It's basically an adrenaline autoloader. It can permanently have adrenaline level of DPM in battle. And that's what really I want to talk about on this tank. However, it is a bit hard to explain, so please do check out my website review where I've sort of written down my thoughts a lot more concisely about this tank, and it will give you just a full guide how to use it properly, which will of course be more helpful than just watching two battles as I show the tank. However, with that said, let's get on to this tank's stats. Here you can see its armor profile against 225mm AP. And you can see that it's quite solid. The upper plate is basically fully red. The turret is basically fully red, though it does have some weak points. So the lower part of the front upper plate is roughly 215mm thick. That's this section here, though while it is a weak point, you do sort of have to try and avoid hitting the very front of the upper plate and, of course, the stronger areas behind it. And then, of course, the lower plate is fairly weak. However, low penetration tier 7s will actually struggle to go through this because it is a fairly decent 175mm of effective armor. And then on top of the turret, you've got that big cupola. However, while this is the usual US heavy tank cupola with the massive machine gun port, it is not as large as the other ones that you'd be used to having. For example, the T95E6 or the E2. This one is a slightly smaller cupola and slightly better armored, which I will show in a minute. But then switching to premium ammo, and of course you can see here when the hull is turned, there is that weak point on the side of the hull, which makes it a bit awkward for side scraping and angling. But then switching to premium ammo, you can see really not much changes because the upper plate is so strong and well angled. So it makes it slightly more penetrable on the upper plate, but other than that, there's no change. The turret doesn't change, the weak points don't change. It's just the upper plate and a small area around the gun. So the turret armor and the hull armor of the Yoh are both very solid. And in fact, the upper plate is up to 500mm thick, and the turret is 260 at its weakest, but that's under the gun. Generally, it's over 290, 300mm. Now, getting to this weak point, the cupola on top, you can see here on the model of the M-IV-Yoh that the cupola has these red areas around it, which make it quite hard to penetrate being 215mm if you do hit that area. So you have to try and hit it dead center and avoid shooting the sides. Also note that the Yo has these, I believe they're rangefinders, but they are not spaced armor. They are just regular armor, which you can penetrate through if you hit them. And then switching to the live view, you can see why that cupola is a bit troll and why you have to hit it dead center, because if you do hit the edges, there is a chance you hit some of the red parts or ricochet off. Uh, but yeah, that's basically it for the cupola. Next, I'm going to talk about how you sort of have to face. Well, actually, I'll talk about the gun depression first. So, when using gun depression, you can see there's not much change in armor. It has 8 degrees. The cupola is still showing, and of course, you can raise the turret up when you use gun depression. So here, let's get it to 8 degrees like this, and then you raise it up. Of course, the cupola is still visible, but you can negate that by doing this. It's a bit of an awkward maneuver, definitely. But if you just keep sort of moving the turret and raising and lowering the gun, it does throw off enemies, even if you aren't 100% sure that this is exactly what you're doing, because it can be a bit hard to gauge during a battle. But yeah, gun depression, when it's using gun depression, it's fine because this tank's armor is just so strong on the turret. Uh, but yeah, overall, very good armor profile for the Yo. Next, I'll talk about sort of how you'll face against this tank, because it can be actually quite an annoying tank to fight. And the reason for that is because it has certain traits which make it just a bit annoying. So, one will be the strong turret side armor. Unlike most tanks, the Yo actually has very high base thickness on its turret sides, 210 here, which is why it will be quite good for those moments where you do poke up on a ridgeline, for example, like this, and then you have to aim at multiple enemies. So one is in front of you, one is to the side. They might see this, and it will be hard to penetrate because your turret side is very thick. So it is nice for being able to poke ridges and not just take a ton of damage in the turret side. And you can see that here. So next, in terms of the armor, one thing to note will be how you can raise and lower the gun and how that affects the tank. So here we can see the turret is an oscillating turret. Against standard ammo, it is very strong, but then you can see in some cases where you load premium ammo, 265 in this case, then certain areas will become weak. One will be the area under the gun when you raise the turret, and you'll raise the turret to try and hide that cupola sometimes. And that does expose the massive weak point under the gun. Another will be the areas right above the gun, above the turret shield. Those are penetrable, but it is quite hard shot to hit because it's right at the top of the turret, and if the tank goes like this, then that weak point is gone. Another thing to note is never lower your gun because it makes the turret roof weak. I believe that is it for the armor profile. Next, I'll talk about the mobility first, because just like the Lion, the Yo has sort of a one-of-a-kind gun. So top speed is 40, that is quite good. Reverse is 18, which is very good for a heavy tank. It makes it very flexible for getting out of certain situations and reversing around corners into cover. The actual, the in-game acceleration is shown as 16.2 horsepower per ton, which is quite good for a heavy tank, especially with 40-kilometer top speed. This tank does weigh 47 tons, so it's lighter on the lighter end of heavies. Actual acceleration is under 15, and just under 11 on medium terrain. Both of these are okay, though medium terrain isn't ideal, but it's still okay. It's not terrible. Traverse speed 40.8, that is good, and 30, that is average for hard and medium terrain, respectively. So the reason the Yo slows down so much on medium terrain down to 10.8 horsepower per ton and 30 degrees traverse is because of its terrain resistances, which are 1.5 on medium terrain, which is a terrible difference compared to the 1.1 it has on hard terrain. It makes it very slow. Well, not very slow, but it makes it much slower on medium terrain compared to hard terrain, where really it feels more closer to a heavier. but overall mobility of the tank is fine. Do try to keep on roads and paved areas with concrete because then your tank is pretty fast. If you go off-road, it does slow down very noticeably. Uh, I'll leave the gun to last because really it does take some talking about. Next, I'll go into the equipment of the tank and what I would recommend. So, vents or calibrated shells. I'd generally recommend calibrated shells because this tank has pretty poor dispersion, and calibrated shells will let you quote unquote aim less because you have more penetration. Up to 235 on AP, which is very nice, and almost 280 on APCR. However, I personally am using improved ventilation, and that is because I am min-maxing on the reload time of this tank, which, as you'll see later, is a big uh, trait that this tank has, and this lowers the reload down to 13.1 seconds. Um, and of course, it also does just increase the other stats very slightly, which is nice to have. Next, engine accelerator, because this tank is fairly mediocre in terms of acceleration on medium terrain, and also it just doesn't need more traverse. Next, improved assembly. I am using it because I believe the armor of the tank is good enough. However, enhanced armor does have a use. Mainly, it will improve the areas of the armor which are directly under the gun when you do raise it up, and of course the upper plate and turret front against the very high penetration levels you'll face of tier 9. Um, since tier 8 really can't do anything against the turret front or the upper plate of the M-IV-Yoh. Next, gun lane drive. This is because the tank has fairly mediocre aim time of 2.43 seconds base. It's definitely needed, and there's nothing wrong with the shell velocity. I am running refined gun because this tank has a fairly poor base dispersion of 0.362, just like a Chrysler K or similar to a T32. This dispersion is actually all right when you do use vertical stabilizer because your aim time is a bit better. However, I am using refined gun in this case because its accuracy does just get very nice, down to 0.298. With vents, of course. Without vents, then it's down to 0.308, which is still very, very good. Also, on top of this, gun handling of this tank is very good, so hence why I'm dropping the vertical stabilizer. Next, provisions and consumables. This just has the normal set. I'm, of course, using an engine power boost because the tank doesn't have adrenaline. It's technically an autoloader, and it does need some help with the mobility on medium terrain. Now, getting into the gun. Again, if you want to skip this and go to the gameplay, go ahead, but the gun is really what makes this tank different, what sets it apart. And it does need some explaining because it will be very easily missed, very easily overlooked. So this tank mounts a 105mm quote-unquote autoloader gun. In terms of autoloader, it's not really. It's more like an assisted loading mechanism. So if you think about how an autoloader works in-game, generally they're drums where it sort of automatically puts the shell into the tank, and within 3 seconds, the shell is ready to go. In terms of an assisted loader, it would be more like the person is still loading the shell into the tank, but there is a system which helps them to load it a bit faster. And that's what I would say the M-IV-Yoh is. It's not a proper autoloader, but it is faster loading. So the damage of this gun is 310 on AP, 260 on APCR, and 420 on HE. In terms of its AP and APCR damage, it's fairly normal for a 105, though it does have quite nice HE shells, just like the German Tier 8 heavy tanks. The gun has 4 shells in its magazine with a 6.98 second intraclip. This is what sets the tank apart from other autoloaders and what makes it really not an autoloader. A 7-second intraclip, almost. And of course, that takes 20.94 seconds to unload and deal 1,200 damage. However, these two numbers are irrelevant. Don't think about the 20.94 or the 1,240. They are completely irrelevant numbers. It's just there for the sake of stats. So next, reload time of the full magazine is 13.6, which gives it 2,156 DPM. That is quite good DPM for a quote-unquote autoloader, and it is good DPM, well, decent DPM for a single shot, though this is not that sort of. Reload time of 13.6, that is very fast for a magazine. Penetration 218, that is fine. APCR with 265, that is good, and HE with 53, that's normal. Aim time, again, fairly normal, pretty decent, 3.3 or 3.5 seconds, and the base aim time of 2.43, that is not great, but it is not terrible either. Dispersion 0.362, again, it's not great. It's definitely below average for a 105mm in Tier 8, especially when you compare it to a T-54E2, for example, which has 0.326. Gun handling is amazing for a heavy tank. It is really very good, and hence why I'm not using vertical stabilizers on this tank, because it can just get away with not using it. In terms of how this gun feels overall, it is quite nice because the aim time is made up for by good gun handling, and it allows you to have better dispersion with refined gun, taking it down to less than 0.308, which is very nice. Overall combination is very good. Next, yeah, those are the gun stats. So let's talk about the gun of the M-IV-Yoh. So it's a very interesting, very unique gun. I'm going to try and explain it briefly, not in full detail because it's just too difficult to explain in a video like this. I'll say if you do want to check out how to properly use the gun, how to sort of abuse it and use it to its full advantage, make it really very strong. Check out this section of my review. It will let you know how to properly take advantage of what this gun can offer. But essentially, what you need to know is that a 6.98 second intra-clip reload gives you an effective DPM of 2,665 when you are unloading the magazine. And that is basically adrenaline DPM for a regular gun tank. For example, a T-54E2. When this tank activates adrenaline, it has a 7.1 second reload. This tank, its intra-clip is 7.0 seconds. So, essentially, your magazine unloading is like having adrenaline activated. Now, yes, you have a magazine reload time of 13 seconds. However, 13 seconds is so fast. You can squeeze that into almost any situation in battle, and you won't notice it on other tanks, but playing the Yoh, you will notice it. You will notice those times where it's like, I could reload for 13 seconds here and have a full magazine for the next fight. And that's really the massive advantage of this tank. You can just choose when you get adrenaline, and it's permanent. It's not like having a cooldown like on the T-54E2, 56-second cooldown, and that's with a cooldown booster on. You can choose just to have adrenaline anytime permanently in the Yoh, just because you can squeeze in a 13-second reload almost any time in battle. Those other times where you can't, you're reloading for 7 seconds. You've got that 2,665 DPM. It is very rare in the Yoh where your hand is forced, where you unload all 4 shells and you are in a situation where you want to be fully reloaded and have more shells, but you can't because your magazine is reloading. This is such a rare situation for this tank, and you just won't notice it from playing other vehicles because there's nothing like the M-IV-Yoh in the game. There are other tanks with 13-second magazine reloads, but they don't have the intra-clip like this. It's not really a DPM autoloader. The Yoh is a DPM autoloader. But basically, you can choose when to have permanently boosted adrenaline. Your cooldown is only 13 seconds compared to the usual 60 or plus. And on top of that, you can just basically be completely flexible with how you use the gun. And that's sort of the massive thing about this tank, which makes it arguably OP. Permanently boosted adrenaline DPM on any other tank that would be OP. You have to know how to use it though. It's very important to know how to use that DPM, how to boost it, and what situations to reload. If you use it wrong, then this tank is just no better than even mediocre tanks in tier 8. But if you use it right, arguably, it's better than a T-54E2 in some situations. Of course, not all because of the armor, the gun depression and stuff, but just as an example. So I'll show some games of this tank. It's very hard to explain this gun in a video format, I know, because I've tried to explain it 3 times before this final take recording, and it hasn't worked. So I'm just going to advise you to check out the website where it is all written down and my thoughts are concise on this topic. But here I've loaded in late to the battle, 30 seconds late because my game crashed. And seeing my heavy tanks up on this side on the boat, the ship, I'm going to push down towards the middle, where I'll try to get some side shots into the enemies. So for this tank, some things to note when you are watching this gameplay. Notice how quickly the magazine reloads. Notice when I reload the magazine. And also notice breaks in the battle where nothing is happening. You could watch the battle timer at the top and see if it's around 13 seconds, which would be a full magazine reload for this tank. So here the SU is running away. That is a bit of an important thing to note, which will come back to haunt me later in the battle. Unfortunately, my reload not quite enough to get that Panther there, but think about it again. A regular gun tank like the Tiger II or the T-54E2 wouldn't have been able to get that shot either. So here I push round and find a bunch of tanks. In that situation, after I'd shot the SU, I should have really reloaded because I had enough time to do so. And there's that SU coming back to haunt me for 600 damage. Here, final shot into the Jagdtiger. And remember when I said I should have reloaded after shooting the SU? Well, now's a situation where having that extra shell and having reloaded after that shot, I would have been able to shoot the Jagdtiger one more time. But here I'm using the great reverse speed of the tank to get out of the Jagdtiger's line of sight, and I'm deciding whether to flank the SU or not. Then I notice that the Quetzal is spotted, so I'll go and farm him. Notice my reload here. It's as good or better than tanks with Adrenaline Rush. While you may think, oh well, an autoloader would have got its shots in much faster. Yes, but an autoloader's DPM is a lot less than this. Effectively, this has 2700 DPM. Notice how I immediately reloaded after killing the Quetzal, which means I don't have that downtime of waiting longer for a reload. My DPM is essentially 2700 because I'm not ever waiting for a reload. And that is what you have to try and take advantage of in this tank. The fact that you can reload anytime. I can't stress enough how important it is, that 13-second magazine reload, just reloading basically immediately after an engagement because there's no enemies around or such. And it's not like a regular autoloader where it's like, oh, I'll wait 5 or 10 seconds to see if there's another shot because my reload is 24 seconds long. The Yoh isn't like that. It can reload just in a heartbeat, basically. But yeah, this game, fairly average, 2500 damage dealt. Not too much blocks. Unfortunately, exposing the side of the tank to an SU-152 will do that. But a total of 2700 or 2800 combined, and making 104,000 credits, which is pretty nice. I do have another battle here, which was on Castilla. So, once again, just pointing out, notice the reload times of this tank. Unfortunately, in this battle, the Ho-Ri is a little bit annoying, and I tell him to shut up, because he does just continue to ping me and say to not go to the medium side. Which I completely disagree with because there's no one to support the CS-44 and I don't want to camp on the windmill, that is so boring. But yeah. Pushing to the medium side with this CS-44, I'm going to try and utilize this tank's good DPM against the medium tanks. And also notice the mobility of this tank as I'm driving around. I'm staying on the hard terrain to try and keep my mobility at a good level because it does slow down very noticeably on medium. So I haven't really talked about the gameplay of this tank. Basically, it's just a regular heavy tank. For example, like a T-54E2's style of gameplay, or Chisa, for example. It would be that style of gameplay. Some things to note, though, are how you want to angle the turret armor. Either raising the gun, lowering the gun, or turning the turret to the side when you are using gun depression or just against multiple enemies. That poor Comet getting shut down in just a few seconds. So here you can see I've gone for a reload. I know that my reload is quick, so I'm just reloading now so that I can have a full magazine in case I push round this corner and there are some tanks in front of me down here. Now fully reloaded already, and I'm pushing round knowing that there will be some TDs sitting around here. Unfortunately I can't spot them, and I'm going to take a shot from the SU, I believe. Or not, maybe. But yeah, here you can see downtime in the battle, nothing's happening, but I haven't reloaded because I know there are targets right in front of me which are probably going to push, and there's that shot from the SU. So here you can see now is downtime in the battle, there's nothing happening, but I've almost reloaded, so I decide I'll take a blind shot on the Hellcat. There you can see I do get a bounce from the SU, which might have been on my turret front. Yeah, you can see that there. So this is something that's very nice about the Yoh. That part of the turret is extremely strong. The SU probably thought he could penetrate quite easily, but maybe he got a bit unlucky with RNG or such, and he did not go through. But that's one thing I must point out. Even though I was aiming at the Hellcat, I was still able to bounce a shot on the side. That SU is a bit annoying, shooting me again, but my bad for pushing out right in front of him while I'm still spotted. So here I'm deciding whether to go up on the Kolobanov hill or not, and I decide to, so that I can try and spot out that SU so that my allies can deal some damage to him. So here notice the use of HE. Unfortunately I roll a bit low, but it does have some very nice HE shells with 420 alpha where the usual is 400. And unfortunately not able to get another shot. I haven't reloaded here because I know there's a Centurion and an Emil directly under me, and I can use those 3 shells. So I do have to point out, if there is no point to reload, then don't reload, because you do still need those shells. A 13-second reload is still longer than 7 seconds. So if there's no need to, then don't reload. In this situation, I'm expecting the SU to push around the corner. He doesn't, so I pull back and I decide to go for a reload. Since I do know that there's 2 tanks under me, and it's possible for the SU to flank around while these other 2 tanks are pushing me. So here the Centurion decides to try and kill me. He's aiming for my hatch, but due to some RNG and fairly quick movements, he bounces. And here again he misses, so I'm just going to push up and put another shot into him. Again, this is not something other tanks couldn't have done, they would have just reloaded slightly longer, but this tank, with its fairly quick reload, does make it quite nice for dealing with enemies relatively quickly. So in that game, 3,300 damage, and I did block quite a bit of damage in that battle, so you did get to see the armor work. 130,000 credits, and that will be due to this tank not needing too much premium ammo in the majority of battles. So, once again, the Yoh. It's a bit of a sleeper OP tank because of its gun. It's very easily overlooked. A lot of people will look at it like a normal autoloader, like a T-77 or a Scepter or an Emil. But it is not that. It's more similar to a cyclic gun tank like the T-54-E2. And to really abuse that and make it OP, you have to know how to use it properly. You have to know when to reload, and when to just not be sitting there on half a full magazine when you could be reloading. What really makes this tank strong is the fact you can choose to have permanently boosted DPM. And that's not even an understatement. It can just be permanently boosted. You can go through multiple battles where you just never have to reload while there are shots to take. Just because your reload is so quick, you can squeeze it in anywhere. And while I have called it OP, uh, in the video, I will say it is not actually broken or anything. It is just a very strong, overlooked tank. And the reason for it, of course, mainly is that gun. But let's not forget the fact that this tank has a very solid upper plate, very solid turret, even solid turret sides. And of course, despite a cupola, it's not all that terrible. On top of this, its mobility is good as well, and it's not like the gun has tragic stats. It's fairly accurate when you do use the right equipment. It's got good gun handling, it's got good penetration, and it's got a nice selection of shells. It's not like the special autoloader is the only thing going for it. Uh, so yeah, I wouldn't say to lose your mind over this tank. I wouldn't say, oh, this is the best tier 8 tank. You should go buy it right now. Go gamble for it in snow globes. No. For the majority of players, majority of situations, the T-54E2 is better. It's got more gun depression, it's got better accuracy, um, it's got very nice gun overall, and its mobility isn't all that different to the Yo. However, I'll say the Yo is a very interesting tank. It's definitely very, very slept on. It is a very interesting vehicle to have, and if you're a good player, or if you just want to learn how to use a gun like this, you can abuse it and make it really strong. But yeah, that's the M-IV-Yoh. Hopefully, I didn't confuse you too much with how this gun works. If you are interested, I would definitely recommend checking out my website because it is explained so much better there. But yeah, thanks for watching. I'll try get out Panzer 58, Schwarzpanzer 58 content soon.